Hi everyone, welcome back to Platform Strategy. So this is our course 5B. This is to do some discussions for this topic, platform governance. So we know platform governance is pretty much talking about how to design some rules for people to interact on your platforms, to determine who may enter your platforms, to determine the scope, and determine what people may do on your platforms. All right? So we do have several questions to ask you. Let's take a look at them. So our first discussion is regarding our strategies to open to the general publics or to control their entry. We mentioned to you that for Android and iOS, pretty much they are doing the same thing regarding app developments. All right. So there is an app that may be uploaded to these kind of two platforms. All right. For Android, you have Google Play. For iOS, you have App Store. And you have two sides. You have the app developer side and you have the user side. Somehow there are more apps on Android. Somehow there are more downloads on Android. But somehow iOS has higher revenue, right? So we want to know why that happens, and maybe we want to ask why or how those platform governance rules are regarding their revenue models. So let's answer these questions one by one. So first, somehow app developers prefer Android more, and there can be many reasons. So first, Android in some sense is free. So you don't need to pay anything to write Android app. All you need to do is to have a PC, for example, and then you download those Android developing tools, and then you start to do that. iOS is different. If you want to do iOS, you first need to have a Mac. And then you somehow also need to, for example, have an iPhone or iPad. That may be easier for you. And you need to pay developer fee to Apple so that you may develop iOS apps. So that's one thing. Also, for Android, you don't really have strong control, right? So there is no strong control. That means as long as you develop something, almost always Google Play allows you to upload that to the platform. So that's not the case for iOS. For iOS, they do have strong control. So that means maybe you also like to use iOS to develop your app, but iOS consider you as your app is not good enough. Okay, so that's another reason. Also, maybe you think that for Android there are more users, right? For iOS, there are a lot of users, but on Android you have more. So that can also be a reason. Okay, so that's regarding part one. For part two, Android have more apps and more downloads. Why is that? Well, more users definitely a reason. There are so many users, right? So roughly you have 7% versus 30% or 80% versus 20% regarding Android users and iOS users. So if you have more users, then you have more downloads. Makes sense, all right? But the thing is that iOS has higher revenue. Why is that? So there can be several reasons. First, for iOS, there is a strong control, right? So that typically means the average quality of those apps is higher, all right? I'm not saying that all the iOS apps are good, but in average, they seem to be good. At least we consumers, we believe that those apps are good, so that we are willing to pay more. On the contrary, on Android, there are just so many apps that in some sense are trash. They are not really completed, but because Google does not care about that, so you are free to upload everything you have onto Google Play. Well, so if that's the case, if you know there are some weird things on the platform, it's not so easy to ask you to buy something. Okay? So this policy definitely has some impact on the perceived quality, and then it's going to make people willing to pay more for these apps. Finally, maybe you may also say that, well, iPhone or iPad in general is more expensive, right? So that somehow means those iOS users, they seem to have more money. They seem to be richer, or at least they are willing to pay more on their phone or pads. All right. So if they are willing to spend a lot of money buying a hardware, then it doesn't really matter to pay $1, $2 to buy an app, right? So that can also be a reason. All right. So these are all some background information. Now is the last one. We want to somehow take a look at the platform governance rule and their revenue models. So let's consider these two companies. So regarding governance, Android is doing opening, right? And iOS is doing controlling. So that's something we already know. Then how about revenue models? If you think about those commission fees, 30% collected by Android and iOS, you don't see any difference. But if you think further, if you think about Android is made by Google, right? How Google makes money in almost all its services? Well, Google do advertisements, all right? On the contrary, how Apple make money when Apple was established? Well, they make products and sell products, all right? So somehow they determine to make money in different ways. One company is more willing to create advertisements, create a place to attract advertisers. The other companies want to have good products so that they can be sold at good prices. Then it makes sense for Google to do opening strategy, right? You want to do advertisements, you need to have a lot of users. To have a lot of users, you need to have a lot of apps, and then that requires you to do opening. You cannot just do a hard control to make your user base smaller. That's not good if you want to do advertisement. On the contrary, if Apple wants to sell something, it makes sense to do controlling. Otherwise, it's not going to make people willing to pay. All right? So the thing is that you really need to align your pricing strategies and your governance strategy. You cannot say that you want to use advertisements to make money, but you do control. That does not make sense. Or you say you want to have high price and then you do opening. That also makes no sense. All right? So you need to align your revenue models with your governance models so that it makes sense for you to run your platform. That's the main message we want to tell you in this particular discussion.